The certified letter was crisp, the ink unforgiving. Cease and desist, immediate remediation of non-conforming pool structure. Leo Maxwell crushed the paper in his fist, the sound like dry leaves shattering in his otherwise quiet backyard. The pool, his sanctuary, a cool 20,000-gallon rectangle of turquoise relief in the suffocating Arizona heat, was deemed a nuisance and a hazard by the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. More accurately, by Veronica Ronnie Sterling, the self-appointed tyrant of the HOA board. Ronnie lived 2 houses down. Her obsession with Leo's pool had started subtly, a question about the chemical logs, a polite inquiry about the pump's operating hours. It escalated into a full-blown campaign when Leo, an architect by trade but a dreamer by nature, had refused to install the HOA-mandated beige prefab safety cage around it. He built a custom, invisible glass railing that was demonstrably safer and infinitely more beautiful. Ronnie, whose life seemed to be measured in documented compliance and the sterile absence of personality, didn't care about safety or beauty. She cared about the rule. The final straw came during the annual neighborhood barbecue. Ronnie, wearing a tailored khaki jumpsuit that seemed to repel joy, cornered Leo. "Your pool is a liability, Leo, and frankly, it's attracting vermin." Leo's 10-year-old rescue golden retriever, Buster, who occasionally dipped his paws in the shallow end, was apparently the vermin. Leo had laughed, a genuine, dismissive laugh, and that, he realized too late, was the mistake. He'd exposed the crack in her armor of authority. He'd shown her she was ridiculous. The letter gave him 7 days. Drain it, fill it with dirt, or face escalating fines and a lien on his home. When Leo called her, his voice tight with barely controlled rage, she answered with the icy tone of a district judge. "Ronnie, this is insane. My pool is pristine. It's cleaner than the water that comes out of your tap." "The water clarity is irrelevant, Mr. Maxwell. Section 4C, subsection 2, item pool abandonment and conversion, states that any swimming structure not maintained for recreational use by human residents must be permanently removed. Your structure, as evidenced by its lack of frequent use and unconventional perimeter, is deemed non-compliant." She paused, letting the silence hang. "You have 7 days. Do not make this difficult." The heartbreak wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. The pool was a promise he'd made to himself after his divorce, a place to read, to think, to simply be. To drain it would be to drain a piece of his soul. Leo hung up, his hands shaking. He looked at the vast blue rectangle shimmering in the afternoon sun. He walked to the edge, dipping his hand in the cool water. It was then, staring into the crystalline depth, that the flicker of an idea, insane, genius, and perfectly spiteful, took hold. If the rules stipulated it could not be a pool for humans, then he would simply change its primary occupant. The deadline was 7 days. Leo's counteroffensive, however, was already in motion. He walked into his home office and began researching industrial-grade filtration, pH-stabilizing substrates, and the logistics of importing 500 pounds of river stone. This wouldn't be a pool anymore. It would be a loophole. The next day, a flatbed truck wider than Ronnie's driveway arrived. It was followed by a smaller but equally attention-grabbing tanker. Leo's neighbors, normally reticent, peered through drawn blinds. Ronnie Sterling watched from her immaculate bay window, her lips pressed into a thin, white line. She expected the equipment for demolition. What she saw was a massive, industrial-grade reverse osmosis, RO water filtration system, the kind used for large-scale aquaculture, not backyard swimming. Leo, a man whose hands were usually tapping on a CAD screen, was now covered in sweat and dirt, directing a team of 2 bewildered landscape workers. They didn't remove the water, they perfected it. "We need the pH to be dead neutral, stable," Leo instructed the tanker driver, who looked at the giant pool with confusion. "And I need that deep-end rock bed installed before the substrate goes in." The water level dropped a few feet, not from draining, but from the process of back-flushing the old water through the colossal new filter system. Then, the tanker began pumping in purified, dechlorinated water, rich in essential trace minerals, water fit for a laboratory or a rainforest. Ronnie couldn't stand the mystery. On day 4, she marched across the lawn, her heels clicking aggressively on the stone path. "Mr. Maxwell, I notice no substantial progress on the pool's removal. That filtration unit appears to be increasing the pool's viability, not terminating it." Leo, kneeling on the pool deck, carefully pouring a fine layer of inert, mineral-rich gravel into the shallow end, didn't look up. "Good afternoon, Ronnie. I am well ahead of schedule, actually." "Ahead by what metric?" Leo stood up, wiping his brow. He didn't raise his voice, which made his words cut deeper. The pool is no longer maintained for recreational use by human residents, Ronnie. In fact, it's now legally designated under state code as a permitted private aquaculture habitat and conservation zone. Ronnie scoffed. That's preposterous, show me the paperwork. Leo reached into a watertight plastic toolbox and produced a sheaf of documents. A freshly minted state of Arizona private wildlife habitat permit, a detailed technical specification for the new, self-contained, closed-loop filtration system, and a notarized receipt for the purchase of the pool's first occupants. The new filtration system is being calibrated to mimic the complex ecosystem of Lake Tanganyika, Leo explained with a detached, professional tone. It is now a home for life, not a leisure activity, and look closely, Ronnie. He gestured to the deeper section where the water was now an unnatural, vibrant clarity. That deep end is now an established rock pile and cave system. It's an engineered habitat. Ronnie's eyes narrowed as she scanned the documents, her face growing pale. She couldn't find a single clause in the HOA bylaws that covered a regulated wildlife habitat. Her bylaws only mentioned pools and fountains. Is it? Leo knelt down and pointed. In the shallow gravel, a tiny, iridescent flash of blue and gold darted. A pool for humans is maintained with high levels of chlorine. This habitat is maintained for the life support of the Malawi cichlid, a protected ornamental fish species. You wanted me to drain the pool. I have ensured the water is no longer suitable for human recreation, thus complying with the spirit of the abandonment clause. He paused, his gaze meeting hers. Now, if you tamper with this habitat in any way, you are in violation of state wildlife conservation statutes. Good day, Ronnie. Ronnie retreated, defeated but plotting. The battle of the bylaws had been won by a fish, but the war for control was far from over. She would find the flaw. She had to. The real spectacle began on day 6. This was the point of no return. Leo had invested nearly all his savings into this grand, wet act of defiance. The final, massive shipment arrived in refrigerated, specialized transport tanks. The first release was breathtaking. Giant, iridescent Oscar fish the size of dinner plates glided out, their dark eyes assessing the new world. Then came the African cichlids, hundreds of them in every color imaginable, electric blue, sunshine yellow, crimson orange. As they were slowly acclimated and released, the pool was transformed. It was no longer a flat expanse of blue. It was a teeming, three-dimensional ecosystem. Sunlight fractured through the water, catching the metallic sheen of the fish, making the entire backyard glow. Leo had installed powerful LED lighting on a timer, not for aesthetics, but for the health of the live underwater plants he'd anchored to the new rock structures. At dusk, the backyard aquarium lit up, a living, breathing, mesmerizing spectacle visible over the privacy fence. This time, Ronnie didn't approach. She couldn't. She knew a direct confrontation would result in Leo calling the state wildlife agent, a move she couldn't afford with her spotless public record. Instead, she began her campaign of surveillance and documentation, a methodical HOA spy. She bought a telephoto lens and positioned herself behind the strategically clipped hedges in her yard. She took pictures, Leo feeding the fish specialized, nutrient-rich pellets, the high-tech filtration system humming 24/7, Buster, the golden retriever, now simply sitting by the edge, mesmerized by the new tenants. Ronnie was looking for a crack in the ecosystem, a dead fish, a malfunctioning pump, anything that would violate the terms of his new habitat permit. She spent hours poring over the fine print of the permit Leo had given her, eventually finding a tiny, almost insignificant clause. The primary structural integrity of the habitat must remain consistent with its original permitted construction materials. This was it. Ronnie smiled, a slow, cold expression. The pool was made of gunite and plaster. The pool deck was poured concrete. If Leo had changed the physical structure, if he drilled holes or installed permanent features into the shell itself, he might have violated the original construction permit for the pool, which was still technically on file with the county, and the HOA's rules against unauthorized structural modification. On the third night of the aquarium's operation, Ronnie put on dark clothing and crept out of her house at 2:00 a.m. She carried a powerful, focused spotlight and a small, digital voice recorder. She tiptoed to the edge of Leo's fence, shining the beam down into the glowing water, illuminating the concrete lip where the old tile had been. Leo, who had anticipated this, was waiting. He was sitting on his patio, a mug of tea in his hand, a silhouette in the soft spill of his living room light. "Looking for something, Ronnie?" he asked, his voice calm but amplified in the quiet night. Ronnie froze, the spotlight beam wavering wildly. "Mr. Maxwell, I was checking for neighborhood security breaches, a potential prowler." Leo stood up slowly. "The only prowler here is you, Ronnie, looking for evidence to satisfy your need for control." He walked to the edge of the pool deck and pointed down into the water. "If you're looking for unauthorized structural modifications, save yourself the trespass charge." He reached to the side and flicked a switch. The pool deck lights came on. Every element he had added, the massive rock formations, the gravel bed, the underwater piping for aeration, was removable. The entire ecosystem was built on a series of interlocked, weighted platforms that rested on the pool floor, not affixed to the shell. The pump lines ran over the deck, disguised by planters. "No drilling, no concrete cutting. The pool's structure is intact," Leo stated, his eyes boring into hers. "Just as the bylaw requires. You wanted rules, Ronnie. I gave you rule book perfection. Now get off my property." Ronnie stumbled back, the realization that Leo was playing the long game. A game she was losing, hitting her hard. She was forced to retreat in humiliation, her camera and spotlight suddenly feeling heavy and useless. Ronnie, having failed to find a physical violation, switched tactics, public pressure. She sent out an emergency HOA blast email titled "Imminent Danger, Unauthorized Backyard Swamp." She claimed the volume of fish was a biohazard. The filtration system was too loud, and the light pollution from the glowing aquarium was a public nuisance. The email backfired spectacularly. The next evening, people flocked to the outer edge of Leo's property. Word had spread through local social media groups about the HOA Karen versus the backyard aquarium. People brought folding chairs, children, and cameras. They weren't gawking at a nuisance. They were admiring a masterpiece. Leo's aquarium was the talk of the town, an organic, brilliant act of rebellion. People stood in quiet awe, watching the shimmering schools of cichlids dart through the submerged rock formations. Ronnie called the police. They showed up, so a peaceful crowd gathered on a public sidewalk and left after one of the officers asked Leo if the Oscar fish was a red tiger. In a fit of bureaucratic desperation, Ronnie called the county planning and zoning department, claiming Leo had installed a commercial water feature without a permit. This was the final nuclear option. The inspector, a seasoned, weary man named Mr. Peterson, arrived on day 10. He was all business, clipboard in hand, Ronnie hovering at his shoulder like a zealous prosecutor. "Mr. Maxwell, we have a complaint that you have converted a residential swimming pool into an unauthorized commercial display, potentially violating wastewater codes and structural permits." Leo remained cordial. "I'd be happy to show you. Everything is in order." He led the inspector around the system. Mr. Peterson checked the filtration flow, the output of the RO unit, and the electrical connections. Ronnie watched, tense, waiting for a fault. "This is an impressive setup," Mr. Peterson noted, scribbling on his clipboard. "Top-of-the-line closed-loop system. No wastewater discharge to the sewer, which is good. The permit for the private aquaculture habitat is in order. You've clearly followed the regulations there." Ronnie stepped forward, her voice sharp. "But what about the noise? The continuous hum of that massive pump. That's an unacceptable decibel level for a residential zone." Leo smiled faintly and walked to the filtration shed. He opened the door. The shed was lined with thick, sound-dampening acoustic foam. The only sound was a faint, low thrum. "It registers well below the residential ordinance limit, Ronnie," Leo said calmly. Mr. Peterson stepped up to the pool edge, peering in at the darting fish. "The complaint also mentions light pollution." Leo simply pointed to the digital timer box. "The lights are off by 9 p.m. sharp per municipal code. They're high-efficiency LEDs, not stadium lighting." Mr. Peterson closed his clipboard. He turned to Ronnie, his expression neutral. "Mrs. Sterling, Mr. Maxwell is operating within all relevant county, state, and conservation guidelines. This is a permitted, contained, and expertly maintained habitat. It is not a pool, it is not a commercial facility, and it is not in violation of any noise or light ordinance I can enforce." He looked at Leo. "You've created something quite beautiful here, son. I'll be in touch to schedule your annual habitat health inspection." Ronnie Sterling's face was a study in profound, incandescent defeat. She had pulled every lever of bureaucracy she knew, and every single one had protected Leo. She turned to Mr. Peterson, her voice shaking. "You're saying there's nothing I can do? The HOA rules are meaningless." Mr. Peterson sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "The HOA rules state the pool must not be maintained for recreational use by human residents. It is now maintained for life support for a non-recreational aquatic ecosystem. The bylaw, as written, has been satisfied, Mrs. Sterling. In fact," he looked pointedly at the hundreds of fish, "Mr. Maxwell has arguably enhanced the value of his property. The HOA may want to amend its rules to specify no bodies of water of any kind. But until then, you're simply watching a very expensive, very beautiful, and entirely legal aquarium." Ronnie's failure to dismantle the Aquarium of Defiance had profound consequences, and not just for her own blood pressure. First, the political fallout. The other members of the HOA board, 2 retirees and a young couple, were tired of the drama. They had been receiving a flood of emails and calls from neighbors, not complaining about Leo, but complaining about Ronnie. Her abrasive tactics, her misuse of HOA funds on legal threats, and her sheer pettiness were now a public spectacle. At the next emergency board meeting, a motion was passed, a vote of no confidence. Ronnie Sterling was formally removed from the Willow Creek Estates HOA board, effective immediately on the grounds of misconduct and bringing negative publicity to the association. Second, the personal impact. Ronnie, a woman whose entire identity was wrapped up in her control over the neighborhood, became a pariah. Neighbors who had previously tolerated her now actively avoided her. She had nothing left to manage, no rule to enforce. The only thing she could see from her bay window was the vibrant, glowing pool, a constant, sparkling reminder of her public, categorical defeat. Third, the final, glorious twist of irony. The massive, beautiful aquarium had indeed increased Leo's property value, but it was also a complex, demanding ecosystem. While Leo loved his fish, he had to admit the upkeep was a full-time job. He was, after all, an architect, not an ichthyologist. A few months later, Leo received an unsolicited offer on his house, a staggering, above-asking price. The buyer was a local millionaire, a collector of exotic fish who had been following the story and was utterly captivated by the pool's setup. The man insisted on buying the house furnished, with the aquarium, the fish, and the complex filtration system intact. Leo accepted. It was time for a change of scenery, and he had made his point. On the day of the closing, Leo called Ronnie. She answered, her voice sounding hollow. "I just wanted to let you know, Ronnie," Leo said, looking out at the dazzling water for the last time, "that I've sold the house, moving on." A spark of hope entered her voice. "Sold? To whom? Will they finally be draining that monstrosity?" "Oh no," Leo chuckled softly. "The new owner is a wonderful man. He's going to expand the tank, actually. He's adding a new, specialized heating element and plans to turn it into a saltwater reef habitat. He's importing live coral and a small group of juvenile sharks." Ronnie gasped an audible, choked sound. "Sharks, that's a violation." "Is it?" Leo replied, echoing her own dismissive tones from months ago. "The original rule was about a pool for human recreation. The new owner's habitat permit covers large predatory fish, and guess what? He's planning to name the biggest one after you. A beautiful 7-foot blacktip reef shark, Veronica." Leo hung up the phone before she could respond. As he drove away, he glanced in his rearview mirror. He could see Ronnie Sterling standing perfectly still in her front yard, staring across the lawn at his now former home, where a new, even more immense filtration system was already being craned over the fence. She was alone, powerless, and facing the prospect of a 7-foot reef shark named after her living 200 feet from her kitchen window. Leo had not only saved his pool, he had architected a perfect, living karmic justice that would remind Ronnie Sterling of her defeat every single day. He drove off, smiling, already planning his new, smaller indoor tank. "Would you like me to develop a 1-page epilogue summarizing the Willow Creek Estate's new, post-Ronnie HOA rules regarding non-recreational bodies of water, and the ongoing saga of the shark named Veronica?"